Hello, this is Artur Kwasnikoff again, and welcome to another video of Delzhi in 44 letters. This one's a little bit different because I was inspired to make a little bit of a review and kind of like a short quiz and activity of the letters that we've covered so far. I think these videos that have activities and quizzes and all of that, they're going to be a little bit more stripped down. They're not going to have as much cultural information and artistic esoterica. They're going to be more about just the process and the forms and writing itself. So we've only done 11 letters so far, and only 2 are explicit vowels. So there's not too many words that we can think of in native Nichil Denina, but it does open up the possibility of other languages because we have enough letters that we can work with languages like English. And I think the primary goal of creating this whole written system was to make this system that could be used to write anybody's native language, whether they grew up having any working knowledge of Denina or not. And some of the smaller, more calligraphy style paintings that I've done, I've actually used this system to write passages from books and literature in many languages, and that's really fun. And maybe at the end of this series as a whole, I'll get to look at some of those and talk a little bit more in depth about the using of a writing system and how it is applied to other languages and what those challenges are. And I personally, I find it to be fascinating. I know for many people are probably not as interested and invested as I am, but it's something that I've always just really loved, and I'm very happy with this system and how it looks and how it functions, and I'm very happy to share it. So I've used some bigger brushes here to write the letters bigger so we can review them. And remember, we're going bottom up and in lines or columns, I should say, from right to left. So we started with del, which is that throaty glottal stop in between mostly consonants. That's ang, the ah sound, like the letter A. Ben, the B sound, b. There's chi, the ch sound. And there's chu, which is the glottalized ch sound, the ch sound. Ch, ch, ch. Then there's das, the D sound, da, da, D. We did dli, the DL sound, which I used as an example in the word paddle. It's the last syllable of paddle, paddle, also found in the mouse word dlina. Then we learned zel, which is the DZ sound, and that's at the end of words like beds. That's the DZ sound, z. Then we learned L, and that's the vowel, which is kind of like RE, but the softy, eh. Then we learned fe, which is that letter that's almost exclusively found in loanwords, which is the F sound, like far and fast. And most recent, before I started to work on this quiz, was gu, the G sound, gu. And as you may be able to tell, we're in the middle of some other similar G sounds too, but we're just gonna end with this one for this part. So what I want to do is I just want to take my pen, and I'm using my glass pen because it does function a bit more like a ballpoint pen because that's what people will have. And I'm just gonna spend a minute here drawing the letters again. It's just so people can get a better sense of how they are made and their form. And so I actually may not talk for a little bit. I might just do this and you can enjoy the sound of my heavy breathing or possibly my dog snoring, who is currently at my feet. Um, or some of the birds outside. Okay, so I'm going to try to do this so people can see better. So I'm going to try to do it with the pen extended out in my hand. Okay, so let's write a del. Then we'll write ang, ben, chi, chu, das, gli, zel. I'm going to go to the next line here so I don't get too close to everything else. El, fe, and gu. And right next to that, we'll do some of the lowercase too. So let's start with del, ang, ben, chi, chu, das, gli, zel, el, ve, gu. And that's how to draw them, kind of in a quick succession like that. And that's actually going to be the hardest part if anybody is sitting down and really dedicated to learning how to write with this. Imagine yourself back in kindergarten and like even first grade when you were first starting to assemble words, and how challenging that was to remember the letters and to put them together. And it felt like writing one word took forever and a monumental amount of effort. And remember in school they would give and this is kind of true all over the world, like a little worksheet with like a little picture they drew on top, maybe like a stick figure, and then they would have to write a sentence, and that sentence would be like all of 5 words, like I am happy running outside. And so imagine being like your 6 or 7-year-old self and having to do that, and what a monumental effort it was to put those words together, even if they were badly misspelled, which I'm sure that people had teachers who pointed it out for them. What a huge effort it was. And I remember being in 2nd grade and having a teacher who would challenge us to write one big long word that we had no idea what it was, but just to write it before we even knew what the definition was. And I found that to be a really cool way to hone my writing skills, because even as a very precocious 2nd grader, I found that to be a big challenge, because my mind just wants to go, well, what does it mean? What does it blah, 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 blah? And I almost couldn't even focus on my paper because I just want to know so much. And so what I want to do with these little activities and side discussions sort of is just to kind of rein it all in and to embrace kind of being a kid again, and knowing that these things are difficult, they're hard, and they seem silly. And when I do my own writings, I still make mistakes. Sometimes I forget a letter in some type of written transcription I'm doing. Sometimes my writing is not in order, and the reason I refer to this page a lot because it's the first full page I ever did where I did it freehand without graph paper. And so I just love keeping it as a reminder for myself that practice does make perfect, which is one of my most hated expressions, and the reason I hate it is because it is true. And I think when people encounter something that they're having a difficulty with practicing at, it's not because the thing they're actually doing is hard to do. It's because of the mind, and the mind wants to do other things. It wants to go on to something else. And that's actually a challenge. That's why a lot of people in my tribe don't have a vested interest in things like language and any of the more fun trappings of culture is people, they just don't have time, they don't have the space, and they don't have the mental bandwidth because it takes time. It takes time and practice. And as we all know, introducing anything into our lives is a challenge. It's like it is work. And so for me, I am very privileged in the sense that I'm in a situation right now where I can dedicate a lot of my time just to doing this, and I'm very happy for it. And so I'm trying to make the most of it as best as I can because I want to have some type of record keeping in this format that keeps these things going persistently. So that all being said, let's look at the letter forms one more time. And I had mentioned the word transcription earlier, and that's kind of the type of just a short quiz activity I want to do with you. But before I do that, I want to just define the differences between these words because people have heard them, but they'll have different meanings in writing and language studies. So what we're doing is transcription, and transcription is just taking sounds. Like I'll say a word, and you'll be challenged to figure out which letters I'm saying and write that in a word yourself. And we're only going to do that a few times. So if you want to prepare a little written sheet with numbers from right to left, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you can. Or you can just do this mentally, because I'm just going to give you the answers right after. So that's what transcription is. It's taking sound and it's putting it into writing or symbols. And transcription can also include sounds like if somebody is being interviewed on a radio show and somebody knocks at the door, a transcription of that will include a parenthesis that says, knocking sound at the door, blah, blah, blah. And then there's translation. Translation is a word that we almost all know. It's taking words and phrases and meanings from one language to another. And there's different levels of translation. There is a level of translation which includes idiomatic translation. And that is to make sure that when somebody is using a figure of speech in one language, and when they are doing a translation of that, they might change that whole expression into a whole different expression that makes sense to people who speak that other language. So for example, one I'm always saying is, that's a tough pill to swallow, which means it's some unfortunate news or circumstance that we kind of have to put up with. Having to practice to get good at something is a tough pill to swallow. And that might not make sense in another language. So somebody who is translating into another language might drop that phrase completely and include something that has that same meaning for those people in that other language. Maybe they have an expression that is, that's a rough stone to toss or something like that. So they might use that instead because even though that's a different literal word, it means the same feeling and expression wise. Then there's transliteration, and transliteration goes a little bit higher because it is mostly about writing. It's words and expressions translating in one written system to another. And so you can think of transliteration as being sort of like if I were to give you writing that is pre-existing in Latin letters. I have a book or something that says, it's just a book in English. And if I were to ask you to do transliteration, you would sound out all those words in your head and then write them in Delzhi. And transliteration doesn't have to have anything to do with expressions in language necessarily because it's mostly about sounds. But there is expressiveness in syntax. And so if there's a different form of creating a sentence in a different language, if it's a very exotic language, then they may still change some expressions like you would find in translation, just to better match the logic of how that syntax is in that other language. And syntax is the logic of making sentences out of words. And so sometimes transliterations don't completely do it. They're just for sounds, not necessarily the wider definitions of language. And then there's localization, and localization is really cool to me because it's used a lot in mass media, videos, movies, film, video games. And localization is sort of like translation and transliteration, but it's just about symbolism and imagery. And a good example would be, let's say somebody makes a movie and there is a... Boy, I can't even think off the top of my head. Let's say somebody makes a movie and they have some sort of prop, or there's something that the camera focuses on that has a very deep meaning. Let's say it is a... God, why is my mind going blank? This is difficult. Okay, let's pretend there's a movie. Let's start again. Let's pretend there is a movie and there is a very poignant scene where a family is going through a struggle with an aging grandparent or something like that. And the aging grandparent has a deep sense of tradition and connection to their culture, and like, let's say they're connected to the monarchy in some kind of way. Well, unless you explicitly mention in that movie what culture those people are, and those characters are kind of interchangeable, then your room for symbolism is going to be open. So let's say that they have, and I'll just use my purple pen. Let's say this aging, like an aging grandmother, she has like a pin that has a Tudor rose on it. And for people in Britain and England, this is not a Tudor rose by any means, but it's one of those very simple heraldic designs. And that could mean, cinematically, that could mean that that's a symbol of her deep feelings for her nation and like history, monarchy, so on and so forth. But let's say they made that same movie try to communicate that same idea, but to people in Japan. Now, for people in Japan, they don't really use the Tudor rose in any of their symbolism or imagery in that way. So, but let's say that a localization expert changes the Tudor rose to a chrysanthemum, which is the floral symbol of the Japanese monarchy. That is an example of localization. It has nothing to do with spoken words, written words. It's all to do with the symbolism and the imagery and the communicating of this higher idea, this almost semiotic idea, which is that one of the highest levels of linguistic discourse, to communicate better to a different audience. And so that's what localization is. And the reason I wanted to talk about all these different things is because these are all things that we have to consider when we study and learn about endangered or indigenous languages. We have to figure out what exactly we're trying to do with them. Are we going to perform it for an audience in some way? Then we would need to think about visual images and symbolism. Are we just going to do translation? Does that mean we are going to just take whatever's in the world around us and just translate everything and just call it good? Are we just going to do transliteration, which is things like this, mess with writing, which is kind of what I'm more into? And those are some questions that there's really no consensus on, and I have yet to meet anybody who has really deeply considered them, because I find that the use of native languages in many contexts as they are now to be blending a lot of those ideas together, and they seem to not really have a direction. And so with me focusing on sound and visual imagery, I'm really focusing on establishing presence, establishing ownership, establishing this idea of connection and expression that is not found through the limits of just using translation into Latin letters. Let's say that there's a sign in English and a sign in Dena'ina using Latin letters. Well, from a distance, that sign looks like it's all saying the same thing. It is a blur of these matching letter forms that blend together. But if you were to see a sign that was half English and Latin letters and half these letters, and going in a different direction maybe, you could tell from a distance there is a difference between the two. And that is where the element of design comes in, and communication, and how design is not quite art, but it is art for the intent of communicating a broader idea. And that is what I really am attached to and like. So that was a very massive tangent, and I apologize, but I thought it was worth it to go into. Because like I said, we only have 2 vowels and so many letters that we've really dug into so far that there's not a lot of words and things that we can make with it. And because this is new, we're just going to keep it simple and just stick to broader topics until we can get to some more lengthy word making. So we're going to do a transcription exercise, and that is going to be, I'm going to say a word or a sound, and you're going to have to think about what I'm saying, the sound of it, and how to best use the letters that we've covered so far to make that sound. And I'm only going to make sounds that use some of these letters each. And this is actually a really common exercise for people who go into higher levels of studying phonetics. They do many hours of transcriptive drills where they just listen to speakers or conversations and they write everything down using that International Phonetic Alphabet. And so this is a little bit like that, but a much smaller, shorter version. And each of these sounds is only going to be a few letters long. They won't be very long. So, and if you're still not comfortable with the letters and you want to go back and review the past videos to get a better idea of what they are and seeing me make them again and talk about their shapes, yeah, you're more than welcome to. Just for familiarity, you can. This is a video on YouTube. You can pause at any time. There's no grades. Just relax, take a break, eat a cookie, get yourself comfortable. And so let's start. Okay, the first word I want you to write is the word gega. And gega is a Dena'ina word. It means berry or berries. And as I've mentioned in a previous video, nouns can be either plural or singular. It just depends on context and surrounding words, whether or not people know they're multiple or not. So let's do that again. Gega. Gega. And that should be in column 1, starting from the bottom and going up. Okay, and the next word I'd like you to write is, excuse me, chada. Chada. And chada is a word that means a blanket or a very long robe. And it can be both a modern blanket or an antiquated one, like some kind of hide or fur or whatever. So it's chada. Chada. That should be number 2. Okay, number 3, Dutch, Dutch, Dutch. And Dutch is let me make sure I'm saying it in the same way. Dutch is a directional word. It means something is this way, like this way, come here, almost. Like it's almost like saying come here. This way. Dutch, Dutch. Okay, that should be number 3. Number 4, Ada. 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 And autumn is a word for care or tenderness. It's the feeling that you give when you're taking care of like an animal or a child, or taking care of a situation, even if the situation has more of like a, if it has more of a soft undertone. Like you're not taking care of business, but you're taking care of business. And I hope the change in that tone makes sense of what Ada is. So Ada is much more soft and nurturing in tone. Ada. Okay, that was 4. Now the last 2 are going to be in English. So we're going to do a couple short English words. And I'm going to talk about what I saw today. And that was 2 well-fed dogs in their beds. So number 5 is fed, the English word fed, like I fed the dogs. And 6 is beds, the plural of bed. So beds. Fed and beds. And when you're done, you just sit back and relax and think of that cookie you just ate. Okay, let's go back and I will write what the, I guess, answers are. They're answers for me, but as I have said many times before, this exercise is all about me deciding what some of these letter forms are. So really, you're just being tested on remembering the shapes that I'm providing and the sounds. And so there's really no difference between me saying that these letters mean these sounds and symbolism, and somebody else coming along. Maybe there's some other person from a Dena'ina-speaking tribe, and they say, well, I think this letter should be this sound. And I would have to make room for that interpretation to be there. So as much as this is a exercise in language and writing words, it's also through my own lenses. And so I hope that we can all understand that and kind of accept that for what it is. So let's write the answers. Now, the first word that I said was the word for berries, gega. And if you heard that correctly, and I hope I'm speaking these correctly, and if there's mistakes that I make, if I'm inconsistent, if you make mistakes in answers, it's all fine, as long as we get the idea across and we get close. So gega is gu, the G sound, the S sound, for L, the letter L, G again, gu, and ang for ah. So there's gega, berries. The second word I spoke about is chda, chda, the blanket or robe. Now, there was 2 letters here that have the CH sound, but if you could tell with how short and throaty I made that CH, you should be able to tell that it was a glottalized CH, so it was the letter chu. So we'll start with chu, or chu, I should say. Then das for the D, and then ang for the ah, chda. The next word I said was Dutch, Dutch. And that starts with das for the D sound, ong for ah. And again, if you could tell with how I cut that CH sound, and this is very tricky to do, so if you said chi, that's fine. But I was really trying to say ch'u again. And so the difference, let's say if I used chi instead, I would say dach, dach. And you could hear that slight rushing of air in my mouth at the end of that CH sound when I fully vocalize that CH, dach, dach. But when I say this word, the this way word, dach, 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 it's short, it's cut off. I still have a little bit of that sound coming out, but I let the sound stick in my throat a little bit without letting it fully come out. Dach, dach. Okay, and the next one was care, ada. And this one's pretty easy. Ang, das, ang, ada. And then I said I had 2 well-fed dogs in their beds. So fed. So these are the English words. Fed, the F, fe. L for eh. And das for the D. Fed. And they were in their beds. So we have ben for the B sound, L for the E sound, and if you remember, the del sound is the same sound as the words that end in DS in English, most of the time. So z, z. And that's the great thing about transliteration is you'll notice that in English, in Latin letters, that word is 4 letters, B-E-D-S. But using this system, it's only 3. Ben, El, Del. And that's all of the sounds that we went through. As we go through more of the letters, and I come back to more of these, there'll be a lot more straightforward and a lot more words to work with. There's going to be some very useful consonants coming up, and I think maybe not a lot more vowels anytime soon, but definitely some very useful demonstrative consonants that are going to open up a lot more words that we can look at and practice with, and even start to make like rudimentary sentences. And if there's one thing I'm not, it's a denying grammarian because it's a very specific and complicated system, and without having a community of people to practice with and to get to that higher level, it is like learning in a second language at an advanced university level. It can be a lot. And so for me, I'm much more happy sticking to basic words and phrases and using visual interpretation for the language more so than the real fine-tuned cogs and gears that go into it. So, how did you do? I hope you did well. I hope you, and even if you had no idea what was going on and you were just like all over the place and frantic and ended up with nothing, that's fine, because this is like a whole new thing for people, and it is like being a kid again. It is being like back in school and trying to figure out how to make words by yourself. And unfortunately, there is no Delzhi version of Sesame Street. But maybe, who knows, maybe a century or two in the future there'll be one, and boy, wouldn't that be fun. The alphabet song would have to be a hell of a lot longer. Okay, well, I'm gonna put my ink away before it dries up, and I want to thank you very much for joining me for this very special review video, and I hope to see you soon in the next parts of Delzhi in 44 letters. Thank you.